I thought the college reunion would be a few hours of small talk. Then everyone goes home. I was wrong. When my ex-wife stood in front of our old friends, smiled, and told them I was a terrible husband and a terrible father, the whole room laughed while I stood there frozen. I chose silence, not because I accepted the blame, but because I didn't want to ruin the atmosphere. But right then, a woman stepped forward, linked her arm through mine and said, "Honey." And everything flipped. The invitation arrived 3 weeks before the reunion. A plain cream envelope with my name typed across the front. I almost threw it away. College felt like another lifetime, one I didn't particularly want to revisit. But my daughter Emma saw it on the counter and asked if I was going. She was 9 years old and thought everything about my past was fascinating. I told her maybe. She told me I should go because I never did anything fun anymore. She wasn't entirely wrong. My life had become a careful routine. Wake up at 6, make breakfast, drop Emma at school, work until 5, pick her up, help with homework, dinner, bedtime. Weekends were soccer practice and grocery shopping. I didn't mind it. After the divorce, routine felt like survival. Structure kept things from falling apart. But standing in my kitchen that morning, looking at the invitation, I wondered if Emma was right. Maybe I needed to do something different. I work as a senior secretary at Cole Enterprises. It's not glamorous, but it pays well, and the hours are predictable. My boss, Vivien Cole, runs the company with the kind of precision most people only dream about. She's a billionaire, though you wouldn't know it from the way she treats her staff. She's fair, direct, and doesn't waste time on nonsense. I've worked for her for 4 years. She knows I have a daughter. She knows I leave at 5 sharp every day. She's never questioned it. The day before the reunion, Vivien called me into her office. She wanted to go over the schedule for the following week. I mentioned I'd be taking a half-day on Saturday for a college event. She looked up from her laptop and asked if it was important. I told her it was just a reunion. She nodded and went back to typing. Then she mentioned she'd be at the same hotel that evening for a business dinner. She said if I needed anything, I should let her know. I thanked her and left. At the time, I thought it was just a polite gesture. Saturday came faster than I expected. I dropped Emma off at my sister's place and drove to the hotel where the reunion was being held. The building was one of those restored historic properties downtown, all brick and brass fixtures. I walked through the lobby and followed the signs to the ballroom. The room was already half full. People stood in clusters, holding wine glasses and laughing. I recognized a few faces, though most had changed enough that I had to squint at their name tags. I grabbed a drink from the bar and stood near the back. I wasn't planning to stay long. Just show my face, make small talk, and leave. That was the plan. Then I saw her. Lauren was standing near the center of the room, surrounded by a group of women I vaguely recognized from our dorm days. She looked the same. Same blonde hair, same sharp smile. She was talking animatedly, gesturing with her hands. Someone said something funny, and she laughed, throwing her head back. We hadn't spoken in almost 6 years. The divorce had been quick and cold. We'd met in college, dated for 3 years, and got married right after graduation. For a while, it worked. Then Emma came along, and everything shifted. Lauren wanted to focus on her career. I wanted to be present for our daughter. We argued about priorities, about money, about whose job mattered more. Eventually, we just stopped talking. The lawyers handled the rest. She moved to another city. I stayed. Emma lived with me. I thought I could avoid her for the whole event. Just stay on the opposite side of the room and slip out early. But the ballroom wasn't that big, and Lauren had always been good at noticing things. She turned and our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she smiled. Not the warm kind, the kind that said she'd already decided how this conversation would go. She walked over with her group trailing behind her. I straightened my shoulders and took a sip of my drink. Lauren stopped a few feet away and tilted her head like she was examining something curious. Her friends fanned out beside her, watching. One of them, a woman named Jessica, gave me a polite nod. I nodded back. Lauren spoke first. She said it was surprising to see me here. I told her I could say the same. She laughed and asked if I still lived in the same apartment. I said yes. She turned to her friends and explained that I was the kind of person who didn't like change. The way she said it made it sound like a character flaw. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Another woman, Claire, sipped her wine and avoided eye contact. I kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to give Lauren the satisfaction of seeing me react. She asked how Emma was doing. I said she was doing great. Lauren nodded slowly and said it must be hard raising a kid alone. I told her I managed. She smiled again and said she was sure I did my best. The words hung there, sweet on the surface, but with something else underneath. Jessica tried to change the subject. She asked what I did for work. I told her I was a senior secretary at a corporate firm. Lauren jumped in before I could say more. She told the group that I'd always been good at supporting roles, that I preferred to stay in the background. Claire laughed nervously. Another woman, Amy, raised her eyebrows but didn't say anything. I could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't a casual catch-up. Lauren was setting the stage for something. I considered walking away, but that would look like retreat. So I stood there and waited. She took a slow sip of her wine and asked if I was seeing anyone. I said no. She nodded, like that confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then she turned to her friends and said it was probably hard for me to date because I'd never really understood what partnership meant. The group went quiet. Jessica looked down at her glass. Claire glanced at Lauren like she wasn't sure where this was going. Amy took a step back. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice even. I asked Lauren what she meant by that. She shrugged and said I'd always been better at avoiding responsibility than facing it. That I was a good guy, sure, but not a good husband, not a good father. The words landed like stones. A few people nearby turned to look. I could see the calculation in Lauren's eyes. She was daring me to react, to argue, to make a scene. If I defended myself, I'd look defensive. If I called her out, I'd look bitter. Either way, she won. So I did the only thing I could think of. I said nothing. Lauren took my silence as confirmation. She turned back to her friends and laughed softly, shaking her head like she was embarrassed on my behalf. Jessica looked uncomfortable. Claire muttered something about needing another drink. But Amy stayed, watching me with a mix of pity and curiosity. Lauren kept talking, her voice light and casual, but every sentence was another cut. She said I'd always been good at playing the victim, that I had a way of making people feel sorry for me without ever actually taking responsibility. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I forced it down. I told myself it didn't matter. These people didn't know me. They didn't know what my life looked like. They didn't know that I woke up every morning and made sure Emma had everything she needed, that I showed up, that I stayed. But standing there, surrounded by people who were watching me like I was some kind of cautionary tale, it was hard to believe my own reassurances. Lauren wasn't done. She looked at me with that same sharp smile and said she hoped I was at least trying to be a better father than I was a husband, that Emma deserved that much. The room seemed to tilt. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say that wouldn't sound like I was making excuses? What could I say that would actually change the way these people saw me? I made my choice. I stayed silent. I looked at Lauren, then at the women standing beside her, and I said nothing. Jessica shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. Claire had already turned away. Amy frowned but didn't speak, and Lauren just stood there, victorious, her smile growing wider. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. She'd humiliated me in front of people who used to know me, and I'd let her. I was about to turn and walk away when I felt it, a presence beside me, warm and close. An arm slipped through mine, resting gently against my elbow. I turned, confused, and saw her. Vivien Cole, my boss, standing there in a black dress, her expression calm and unreadable. She looked at me first, her eyes soft, then turned to face Lauren and the others. And then she said it. Honey. The single word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Everything stopped. I stared at Vivien, my brain struggling to catch up with what was happening. She stood beside me like she'd been there the whole time, her arm linked through mine with an ease that suggested intimacy. Her expression was calm, almost bored, like she'd just walked into a perfectly ordinary conversation. But nothing about this was ordinary. Vivien Cole didn't show up at random hotel ballrooms. She didn't call her employees honey. And she certainly didn't involve herself in personal drama. Lauren's smile faltered, just for a second, but I saw it. Her eyes moved from me to Vivien and back again, trying to process what she was seeing. Jessica's mouth had fallen open slightly. Claire had turned back around and was now staring openly. Amy looked like she'd just witnessed a car accident. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and thick. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Vivien spoke again, her voice smooth and unhurried. She said she hoped she wasn't interrupting anything important. Lauren recovered quickly, her smile snapping back into place. She said, of course not, just catching up with old friends. Vivien nodded and glanced at me, her eyes warm in a way I'd never seen at the office. She asked if I was ready to go. I didn't know what to say. My mind was blank, so I just nodded. Lauren wasn't letting this go. She introduced herself, extending her hand toward Vivien. She said her name slowly, deliberately, like she was testing the waters. Vivien shook her hand with the kind of polite professionalism that gave nothing away. Lauren asked how the two of us knew each other. I felt Vivien's grip on my arm tighten just slightly. She said we worked together. Lauren's eyebrows lifted. She asked what Vivien did. Vivien said she ran a company. Lauren asked which one. Vivien told her. Cole Enterprises. The name hung in the air. I watched Lauren's face shift as the pieces clicked into place. Everyone in the city knew Cole Enterprises. It was one of the largest privately held firms in the state. Vivien Cole wasn't just my boss. She was one of the wealthiest women in the region. Jessica's eyes went wide. Claire looked like she'd swallowed something sharp. Amy let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. Lauren recovered again, but slower this time. She said that was impressive. Vivien thanked her with the same polite distance. Then Lauren turned to me, her smile tight now, and asked how long we'd been seeing each other. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Vivien answered for me. She said it had been a while, long enough that she knew me well, long enough to know what kind of person I was. The shift in Lauren's expression was subtle, but unmistakable. The confidence she'd carried all evening was starting to crack. She asked what Vivien meant by that. Vivien's tone didn't change. She said I was dependable, that I showed up when it mattered, that she'd seen me turn down opportunities, and over time because I had a daughter to take care of, that not everyone understood what it meant to put someone else first. But I did. Lauren's smile disappeared entirely. Jessica looked down at her shoes. Claire took a sip of wine and wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Amy was watching Vivien like she was trying to figure out if this was real. I stood there, frozen, trying to understand what was happening. Vivien wasn't defending me. She was stating facts. But the way she said them, calm and unshakable, made them sound like the only truth that mattered. Lauren tried to regain control. She said it was nice that Vivien had such a high opinion of me, but that I hadn't always been so responsible. Vivien tilted her head slightly, her expression curious, but not confrontational. She asked Lauren to clarify. Lauren said I'd struggled with commitment, that I'd been more interested in my own comfort than in making sacrifices for my family, that I'd left her to carry the weight of our marriage alone. Vivien listened without interrupting. When Lauren finished, Vivien didn't argue. She didn't get defensive. She just looked at Lauren for a long moment, then back at me. She said that people often saw what they wanted to see, that it was easy to rewrite history when the other person wasn't allowed to speak, that she'd worked with me long enough to know I wasn't perfect, but I was honest, and that mattered more than most people realized. Lauren's face flushed. She said Vivien didn't know the full story. Vivien agreed. She said she didn't. But she knew enough. She knew I showed up to work every day on time, that I'd never missed a deadline, that I'd asked for flexibility when my daughter was sick and had worked late to make up for it without complaint, that I'd turned down a promotion because it would have meant longer hours and less time at home. She said those were the things she chose to pay attention to. The group had gone completely silent. Jessica looked uncomfortable enough to leave. Claire was staring at the floor. Amy's expression had shifted from curiosity to something closer to respect. Lauren stood there, her jaw tight, clearly searching for a response. She tried once more. She said that work and family were different, that Vivien couldn't judge someone's character based on office behavior. Vivien nodded slowly. She said Lauren was right. But she also said that people who lied at home usually lied at work, too. And people who showed up for the small things usually showed up for the big ones. Lauren's face went pale. She started to say something but stopped. Vivien's expression remained neutral, almost kind. She said she wasn't here to argue about the past. That wasn't her place, but she was here to make sure I knew that not everyone saw me the way Lauren did, that some people valued the things I brought to the table, that I didn't need to defend myself against accusations from someone who'd already made up her mind. The words hit harder than any argument I could have made. Lauren looked at me, then at Vivien, then back at her friends. Jessica mumbled something about needing to find the restroom. Claire said she was going to get another drink. Amy hesitated, then followed them. Within seconds, Lauren was standing alone. Her smile was gone. Her shoulders were tense. She looked smaller somehow. Vivien turned to me and asked again if I was ready to leave. This time, I found my voice. I said yes. She nodded and guided me toward the exit, her arms still linked through mine. We walked past clusters of people who were whispering now, their eyes following us. I heard fragments of conversation. Someone asked if that was really Vivien Cole. Someone else said they didn't know I was seeing anyone. A third voice said I'd always been quiet, but clearly had more going on than people thought. We stepped out into the hallway, and the noise of the ballroom faded behind us. Vivien let go of my arm and turned to face me. Her expression was back to the calm professionalism I recognized from work. She asked if I was okay. I didn't know how to answer that. I asked her what she was doing here. She reminded me that she'd mentioned her business dinner earlier. She said when she finished her meeting, she'd walked past the ballroom and saw me through the doorway. She could tell something was wrong. I asked why she did what she just did, why she pretended we were together, why she defended me to people she didn't know. Vivien looked at me for a long moment. She said she didn't pretend anything. She said what she believed, that I was a good employee, that I was a dedicated father, that people like Lauren only had power if I gave it to them. She said she didn't like bullies, and she didn't like watching good people get torn down for no reason. I didn't know what to say. I'd worked for Vivien for 4 years, and she'd never been unkind, but she'd never been warm either. She was efficient, fair, distant. This was different. This felt personal. I asked if she was worried about how this would look, if people found out she'd intervened in her employee's personal life. Vivien shrugged. She said people would talk no matter what. That she'd learned a long time ago not to make decisions based on what strangers might think. We stood there in the quiet hallway. I could still hear the music from the ballroom, muffled and distant. Vivien asked if I wanted to go back in. I said no. She said that was probably smart. Then she told me to take Monday off, that I looked like I could use a day to clear my head. I started to argue, but she held up a hand. She said it wasn't a suggestion, that I had plenty of unused leave and she was telling me to use it. I nodded. Vivien turned to leave, then stopped. She said one more thing. She said that silence wasn't always weakness, that sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was refuse to engage with people who didn't deserve their energy. But she also said that I didn't have to be silent all the time, that there were people who would listen if I chose to speak. She didn't specify who she meant. Then she walked away, her heels clicking against the tile floor. I stood there alone, trying to piece together what had just happened. My ex-wife had tried to humiliate me in front of people I hadn't seen in years. My boss had shown up out of nowhere and flipped the entire situation. And now I was standing in an empty hallway, unsure whether I should feel grateful or mortified. Probably both. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was barely 8:30. I could go back inside, face the whispers and the questions. Or I could leave. Go pick up Emma early, spend the rest of the evening doing something that actually mattered. The choice felt obvious. I walked toward the exit. As I passed the ballroom entrance, I glanced inside one last time. Lauren was standing near the bar, talking to someone I didn't recognize. She looked animated again, her confidence rebuilt. But something about her posture seemed forced, like she was trying too hard to prove everything was fine. Jessica, Claire, and Amy were across the room, huddled together, and clearly talking about what had just happened. A few other people glanced in my direction and quickly looked away. I kept walking, out through the lobby, into the cool night air. My car was parked 2 blocks away. I walked slowly, letting my mind settle. What Vivien had said about silence kept turning over in my head, about strength, about refusing to engage with people who didn't matter. I'd spent the entire evening trying to avoid conflict, trying not to make things worse, and maybe that was the right choice. But it was also exhausting. Emma came to mind, the way she looked at me like I had all the answers, the sacrifices I'd made that Lauren had turned into failures, the life I'd built that felt small and unremarkable until someone else pointed it out. Vivien had seen value in the things I did. She'd stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself, and I didn't know what that meant or where it would go. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't as invisible as I thought. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. I could still feel the weight of Vivien's arm linked through mine, the way she'd looked at Lauren with that calm, unshakable certainty, the way she'd spoken about me like I mattered. I didn't know if I deserved that kind of defense, but I knew I was grateful for it. I started the car and pulled out onto the street. The city lights blurred past as I drove toward my sister's house. I wondered what I'd say to Emma when I picked her up, whether I'd tell her about the reunion, about her mother, about Vivien. I decided I'd keep it simple. I'd tell her I went. I'd tell her it was fine. And I'd tell her I was glad to be home. I picked up Emma around 9:45. My sister opened the door with a curious look on her face, like she could tell something had happened, but wasn't sure if she should ask. Emma came running down the hallway with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She asked if the reunion was fun. I told her it was interesting. She asked what that meant. I said I'd tell her later. On the drive home, Emma talked about the movie she'd watched with her cousin. Something animated with talking animals. I listened and made the appropriate responses, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying the moment Vivien had walked up and linked her arm through mine, the way Lauren's expression had shifted, the way the entire room had changed in the span of a single word. Honey. It still didn't feel real. Emma asked if I was okay. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking at me with that concerned expression she sometimes got when she thought I was upset. I told her I was fine, just tired. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. I made a mental note to be more present. She didn't need to carry my stress. We got home, and I helped her get ready for bed. She brushed her teeth and changed into her pajamas, while I tidied up the living room. By the time I tucked her in, it was almost 11. She asked if I was going to tell her about the reunion now. I sat on the edge of her bed and tried to figure out where to start. I told her I saw some old friends, that it was nice to catch up. She asked if I saw her mom. I said yes. Emma's face went still. She didn't ask any follow-up questions. She just looked at me with those big, serious eyes that made her seem older than 9. I told her it was fine, that we talked for a little bit, and then I left. She asked if Mom said anything about her. I told her the truth, that her mom had asked how she was doing. Emma nodded slowly and pulled her blanket up to her chin. She told me she was glad I went, that it was good for me to do things besides work and taking care of her. I kissed her forehead and told her I loved her. She said it back and closed her eyes. I walked out of her room and stood in the hallway for a moment. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee even though it was late. I sat at the table and stared at the wall, trying to process the night. I kept coming back to the same question. Why had Vivien done it? She didn't owe me anything. We had a professional relationship. Cordial, but distant. She'd never shown any indication that she cared about my personal life beyond how it affected my work. The way she'd looked at Lauren came back to me. Not angry, not defensive, just calm and certain. Like she knew exactly who I was and didn't need anyone else's permission to say so. The things she'd said about me, that I showed up, that I made sacrifices, that I was honest. Simple things. Things I'd never considered remarkable. But the way she'd said them made them sound like they mattered. Monday came, and I took the day off like Vivien had told me to. I spent the morning cleaning the apartment and doing laundry. Emma was at school. The silence felt different than usual. Less empty. I made lunch and sat on the couch, flipping through channels without really watching anything. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jessica. She said she'd gotten my number from the reunion contact list. She wanted to apologize for Saturday night. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. She sent back a long paragraph. She said Lauren had been talking about me for weeks before the reunion, that she'd been planning to confront me. That Jessica and the others had tried to talk her out of it, but Lauren was insistent. She said she felt terrible for not standing up for me, that Vivien was right about everything she'd said, that I deserved better than what happened. I didn't know what to say to that. I thanked her and put my phone down. Lauren had been planning this, rehearsing her lines, deciding ahead of time that she was going to humiliate me in front of people we used to know. It made sense in a way. She'd always needed to be right, to have the last word. The divorce had ended too quickly for her to get closure, so she'd created her own ending, one where she got to tell the story her way. I went back to work on Tuesday. Vivien was in meetings most of the day. I didn't see her until late afternoon when she stopped by my desk to drop off some files. She asked if I'd had a good day off. I said yes. She nodded and started to walk away, then turned back. She asked if I was planning to attend any more reunions. I told her probably not. She said that was probably smart. Then she smiled, just a small one, and went back to her office. That was it. No dramatic follow-up. No long conversation about what had happened. Just a simple exchange and then back to normal. I realized that was probably how Vivien operated. She did what needed to be done and then moved on. No fanfare, no expectation of gratitude, just action, and then forward momentum. The rest of the week passed quietly. I fell back into my routine. Work, Emma, home. But something felt different. Lighter, maybe. Like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted. What Vivien had said in the hallway stayed with me. That silence wasn't always weakness, that sometimes it was strength, that I didn't have to defend myself to people who'd already decided who I was. She was right. I'd spent so long trying to prove I wasn't the person Lauren said I was, trying to show that I was doing my best, that I was enough. But the truth was, the people who mattered already knew. Emma knew. Vivien knew. My sister knew. The rest was just noise. On Friday, Vivien called me into her office. She said she had a project that would require some travel. Nothing major. A few days in another city to meet with potential clients. She asked if I'd be willing to coordinate the logistics. I said yes. She asked if I needed time to arrange childcare. I told her my sister could watch Emma. Vivien nodded and said she appreciated my flexibility. Then she added something else. She said she valued my work, that I was one of the most reliable people on her team, that she wanted me to know that. I thanked her. She waved it off and went back to her laptop. I left her office and walked back to my desk, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. Not in a grand, dramatic way, just acknowledged. Recognized for the things I did every day without fanfare. It was a small thing, but it mattered. That weekend, Emma and I went to the park. She played on the swings while I sat on a bench and watched. The sun was out and the air was warm. A perfect Saturday. Emma ran over and asked if I'd push her higher. I got up and stood behind the swing, pushing her gently at first, then harder as she laughed and kicked her legs. She asked if I was happy. I told her yes. She asked why. I said because I was here with her. She smiled and leaned back, letting the swing carry her forward. I watched her fly through the air, her hair streaming behind her, her face lit up with pure joy. Everything that had happened came back to me. The reunion, Lauren's words, Vivien's intervention, the quiet aftermath, the slow realization that I didn't need to fight for my dignity, that it had been there all along. I just needed to stop letting other people convince me it wasn't. The life I'd built crossed my mind, small and unglamorous, full of routine and responsibility, but also full of moments like this. Emma laughing, the two of us together. The simple fact of showing up every single day and doing what needed to be done. That was enough. It had always been enough. Monday came again, and I went back to work. Vivien was in her office, typing away at her laptop. I brought her coffee and a stack of reports. She thanked me without looking up. Everything was back to normal, professional, distant, efficient. But I knew now that distance didn't mean indifference, that Vivien saw more than she let on, that she'd chosen to step in when I needed someone and then stepped back when the moment passed. I didn't know if anything would change between us, if we'd ever talk about what happened at the reunion. Probably not. And that was fine. Some things didn't need to be dissected. Some gestures spoke for themselves. She'd stood beside me when it mattered. She'd said the things I couldn't say. And then she'd let me move on with my life. I sat down at my desk and opened my email. The day stretched out ahead of me, full of meetings and deadlines and the 1,000 small tasks that made up my work. Lauren was probably back in her own city now, telling her own version of events. The people at the reunion were moving on with their lives, forgetting the drama of one awkward night. Emma was safe at school, learning and growing and trusting that I'd be there when she needed me. And I was here. Not the person Lauren said I was. Not the person I'd been afraid I was becoming. Just me. A single dad. A reliable employee. Someone who showed up. Someone who tried. Someone who'd learned that honor didn't need defending when you lived it every day. That truth had a way of rising to the surface without being forced. That the right people would see you for who you really were, and the rest didn't matter. I started typing. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and that was enough.